And oh, we actually have 3 minutes. Wait a second. Okay, so now is official. Welcome everyone. I am here now to introduce you. You guys have seen her. She has spoken before, but if you have not seen her talk before, when she was in the group at Scleroderma, I would like to introduce Cheryl Albright. She grew up with a brother with autism and an aunt with Down syndrome. She began working with children with special needs through her Rotary Camp, I don't know how to say the name, at the age of 14. And she continued teaching adapted swim lessons to children with special needs through high school and college. Cheryl has been an occupational therapist since 2003, and she took the first training with us in 2009. She's a certified yoga therapist, has taken all the courses with Yoga for the Scleroderma, and teaches at chapter of support group meetings in Florida. She has made videos on practicing safely at home during the Yoga for the Scleroderma on the YouTube channel. Cheryl owns the Soul to Soul Yoga, which has created a collaboration with Yoga for the Special Child to provide a home in the Sarasota, Florida area. Soul to Soul Yoga provides adaptive yoga classes, both in person and online, to anyone who wants or needs them. So without further ado, it's Cheryl Albright.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I say thank you to everybody in the Yoga for the Special Child community and Shiva Kami for having me come speak at the conference today. I'm going to share my screen in a minute, but last night I was just doing a quick scroll through social media, and I follow a page by Dr. Vanderkolk, who wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And I just wanted to read this quote before we get started on what I'm going to talk about today, but it says, neuroscience research shows that the only way we can change the way we feel is by becoming aware of our inner experience and learning to befriend what is going inside ourselves. I'm going to read it again. So neuroscience research shows that the only way we can change the way we feel is by becoming aware of our inner experience and learning to befriend what is going on inside ourselves. And I think we talked a lot about this yesterday with polyvagal theory. So I just wanted to read that before I get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Of course, now it's not up here. Let's see. Of course, I didn't go back to the beginning. So sorry about that. So Renata already did a good job introducing myself, so I don't have to go through this slide, but I am a big science nerd, and this is kind of why I got started. So after the first training in 2009, I was a pretty sickly 20-something. If you go back and look at the pictures, I was very, very skinny, had a whole list of digestive issues and things going on. And within the first week of taking the training, I was off everything for my intestinal issues. And then within 6 months, I was off of all allergies, asthma, all the meds that the doctors kept throwing at symptoms that had arose. And it got me going, well, why is this working? Of course, Shiva Kami will yell at me and say, stop using your rational mind. But I wanted to know. I wanted to know why everything was changing in my own body. So I started reading and researching, and it just hasn't stopped since. Brain function. This is kind of how I see the world. It's loosely based on the pyramid of learning, which is in a different slide. But what I want you to see here is the kind of layer. So the central nervous system and it's kind of a developmental approach. So the next is sensory systems, interoception, sensory motor, and so on. So if something occurs in the central nervous system, it really doesn't matter. Put a label on it. There could be concerns or difficulties going up each one of those colors. So we'll use CP. We talked about adults with CP yesterday in Shiva Kami's presentation. So within that, there's some injury or insult to the brain, right? Okay. So going up all of these systems, there could be areas of concern. So I'm going to use Jeff as the example. He was I'll call him young man, but he's probably 10 years older than I am, that Shiva Kami was working with. And so he used a wheelchair. So there's some concerns with his proprioceptive sense and knowing where his body was in space. He will tell you that his smell, vision, sound, all of that was pretty straightforward. Interoception, the ability to feel your body's internal sensations. He could tell you if he was incontinent to bowel and bladder. So what that means is he didn't understand the ability to know when he had to go to the bathroom. And that comes from up here. There was nothing wrong with those organs per se, but he just could not feel the need to go. And so relied on other people to help him with those self-care skills. He still had some primitive reflex involvement. Obviously posture, he couldn't hold himself up against gravity. He understood auditory language just fine. He had no problem. And actually he does speak. If you get to know him, he talks a lot more. The first time I got his body to relax, he said a few choice words and was like afraid to move because it's been a really long time he had been completely still. So he relied on other people for his activities of daily living or his ability to do his self-care. He could not get himself dressed without help. He could not go to the bathroom without help. Okay. So that's cerebral palsy, right? But if we use this kind of framework and you could throw out any diagnosis and you're going to find some concerns going up the pyramid. Autism. There are differences in the brain. The neurons cluster instead of map themselves out. And so you get a whole slew of concerns. Most people in the OT world talk about sensory, but they have heightened or decreased arousal in any of those systems and so on. So you could see how using just this slide helps. Now, why? Why do we talk about that? Yoga is the only thing that's working from the very bottom down. All the OT theories say to start with the sensory system. They say to do a vestibular and proprioceptive and a tactile activity to get an adapted response, which you can get. But if you calm down that fight or flight response in these individuals or calm down the nervous system, you get much further, quicker, but it is a long game. I was doing this presentation back in July and a parent raised their hand. They said, well, how long is this going to take? I said, this is not a quick fix. I can't change Jeff's CP. It took me 3 years to get a student in a plank. Like I can't tell you my crystal ball is in the shop along with my magic wand. What I can tell you is that consistency, patience, doing it at home yourself will help increase those outcomes. And not having an expectation that my child is going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And I think because of those developmental milestones and because doctors talk about them all the time, they think that, they wait for that next big goal. Like, will they walk? And it's like working. And so they get it stuck. They kind of get these timelines stuck in their head. And when they can let that go, we get a lot further. So it's interesting to look at this, and then I'm pointing again, just like Sri Devi did. Okay. So when we look at this, this can then be put right here, and it's really just the beginning. So if you took this whole part from executive functioning on down, and you could put it at the bottom of this pyramid. So this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? Because we've got all of this stuff up here. It's just interesting how, to me anyway, that a lot of the therapy theory could be just the bottom of what we're doing in yoga. And it's interesting that everybody uses pyramids. I don't know. Here's another one, which is very similar. This is where I got this from, and I had taken and putting interoception kind of right in here. So when we're talking about individuals that may have limited language, the reason could be, throw a dart. The only thing that they have in common is there's a concern here. There's a concern in the central nervous system. And even with like Down syndrome, we don't necessarily think about as a central nervous system issue, but their brain and body does not communicate the way it should, hence the low muscle tone and things like that. So I still say we could put it in there. So if we take any number of any nervous system dysfunction, it doesn't matter if it's even Parkinson's, MS, when you start looking at this, you can strip the labels away, because you're like, okay, if there's something wrong, or there's a concern, or there's been an injury or insult to the brain or the spinal cord, and so there's concerns going on up. I first learned the pyramid of learning back right after I finished school, and it always made sense, but I just didn't know how to tackle this piece, because they were saying, we'll start here. And I'm like, well, we're forgetting about this guy. Like, how are you supposed to do that? And so I just kept searching. So with limited language, we touched on this yesterday, but no verbal language doesn't mean that they're deaf or they don't have anything to say. Right at the bottom, sometimes I'll have this like, yes, no. When we go into fight or flight, think of the last time that you were upset. You don't communicate clearly. So you need a minute. You yourself have to stop and take a deep breath. So those individuals that have a harder time communicating, their language could go right out the window. I don't particularly like to have iPads there if they're distracted by them, but if it's their only means of communication and they need to tell me that something hurts, or they need to go to the bathroom, or I like to have it nearby. So if they do get agitated, there's a way for them to tell me what is happening. I don't like that. Can we do something else? And if they don't have any of that, you have to be the one that's super connected to say, okay. So I'll use an example. My brother's having issues with his day program. So I'm really trying to ignore my cell phone in the group home at the moment. And I said, well, who did something? And they're like, excuse me? And I was like, he only has this behaviors when he's lost trust, or somebody has laid their hands on him, or something happened. What happened? And they were mad that I put it back on them. I said, it's not a him issue, it's a you issue. So when people get upset, they lose their ability to have verbal language. And so they show it in behaviors. So what are they trying to say? It's a form of communication. It's not anything we need to take personal. It's not a personal attack. You're not a bad yoga teacher or therapist, or we're going to leave the day program out of it, but like you're not a bad person. It's more like, instead of saying, there's a meme that went around Facebook that said, you should say not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you, what's going on with you. Like, they're not trying to be bad, but if that's their only means of communication, that's where it's going to come out. So what are they trying to say? Try to give them words. Oh, is this too hard? Like you've heard Shiva Kami do this. The child gets up and she just stays right there and the child comes back. That's right. We've all seen it in a part 1 training. The child will pop up, they'll come back, but maybe they need to go check in with their parents because they're not 100% sure what's going on and they need that safety, or they just need a break and it's too much stimulation and that flight response sends them off the map. They come back. Try to give them some words, try to give them some language to say, oh my gosh, that was too hard for you. Let's try it this way. You're still in control of the session, but you're empowering them to be like, oh, I'll give an example. One individual that I work with autism will say, hey, you're a bad guy. And that's my indication that's okay, that's too much. You're getting stressed out. Let's take a deep breath. I'm here to help you. And it usually is enough to bring him back down. It's not that I'm a bad guy. That's the only way he knows how to say it. So try not to internalize some of those things that are happening. Increase processing time. I teach this to all of my students, regardless if it's yoga or OT, traditional OT. Some of our students just need a second to process what it is that we're actually trying to tell them. They're saying they take longer to process, especially auditory information. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll say what we're going to do next. Maybe I'll demonstrate what we're going to do, even if they don't look like they're paying attention. And then I go and I wait my 30 seconds, say, okay, I'm going to help you now. And then we guide yourself into the pose. But if I were just to go, okay, we're going to do and grab a hold and try to move them, guess what? They didn't have enough time to process. They're going to take it as a threat. You'll see a jump, a jerk, they'll leave the mat. So I always challenge them to wait 30 seconds. Like count in your head, not out loud, just count in your head. 30 seconds before giving the direction again. Maybe they didn't understand you. Maybe they do need to, maybe they weren't paying attention. Who knows? But you'll be surprised sometimes if you just wait it out. There was a young man they worked with, he moved away, he had to be placed in a group home. But it would take 5 minutes to get through one pose because it just took him so long to process what it is that I was asking him to do, and then to ask his body to do it too. So I did exactly what I said. I said what we were going to do, waited 30 seconds, demonstrated what we were going to do, waited another 30 seconds, gave him a minute to see if he would do it on his own. And he gave me an indication that maybe I'm going to lift an arm up. I'm like, yep, that's where we're going. And then I'm going to help you. And then we go. But it would take a really long time. It's quality versus quantity of poses. I have parents ask, well, what pose, how many poses did you do? I said, people are more important than poses. Take a breath. Use of mantras. Don't leave this out with our friends that have limited language. They will surprise you every time. This little guy, not so little anymore. This is a couple years ago. Nonverbal. Okay. Once again, he has something to say. I don't know if it's going to work with the headphones in. If it doesn't, then I will try to take them out. Can you hear it?
No, I think when you share, did you share computer audio? Because you're sharing a screen, so you have to share the screen audio as well.
Let's see. Let's see if we do it this way.
Okay.
Yeah. So he doesn't speak in complete sentences, and he hardly ever said, he'll wave hi, but he has no problem singing Om Shanti. Of course, you see the you see the jaw clenched to try to stabilize to get those words out, like Renata spoke about yesterday with the polyvagal theory. You see him like, he's got a clench, but he can do it, right? He stabilized his jaw. I didn't have to touch him. I had to give him a little get him started. Like, oh, and then he went. Yeah, I always tell the therapist, I don't necessarily get to see him on a regular basis anymore, but if he is in a group class, I always laugh because he gives everybody such a hard time. I'm like, this kid will fool you. He could hang for an hour class in a group session in the middle of his school day. So him running around and laying around on the floor, that's on you, not him. He can do it. And what I learned from my music therapy friends, such as Gita, is that when you start using music and rhythm, it lights up all the centers of the brain. So I find it interesting that with this method, we start with singing. Light up all the centers before we start doing anything. And I do this from my 4-year-olds. I think the oldest gentleman I see right now is 83. We start with singing. Let's light up everything so that we can move on from there. It's also a great way for, and Hanatsa could speak to this, the language acquisition. There's something about singing is a different pathway than verbal language. And so if we can start with singing, maybe not, who knows? You know, like I said, crystal balls in the shop, but if we can get those centers firing, we might get some verbal language. He only required the one verbal cue to repeat me. And there was a lot of background noise that day, but he still was able to do it. Mom was super impressed. She's the clinical director over at Easter Seals, but super impressed. And let's go to oh, there we go. I kind of touched on this in the last slide when I was talking about waiting 30 seconds and waiting this out, but always communicate what you're about to do and giving them time to process. So we're going to, and we've all seen it during part 1. We're going to bring your awareness to your foot. We're going to pay attention to this part of the body. Now, what I want you to do is this. Okay, I'm going to help you, so that they know it's coming, because that sense of touch in some children, we're going to get to the trauma part in a little bit, causes a reflex the second you touch them. They don't like touch sensation, maybe they don't process touch very well, or maybe it just triggers fight or flight because of some kind of physical trauma that they've been in. So always communicate what you're about to do. Like, it's time for, and then go. Keep an eye on time. So I had before starting with an at-risk youth school here locally, the Florida Department of Children and Family Services had this quote, and I think this encompasses trauma really well. Just means that they're living in more fear than hope. So they're constantly being afraid. It was right before I was supposed to go on, there was a very loud bang, and I didn't know where it came from. Like, I'm in my office by myself. There's nobody. The doctor next door is still doing telehealth. There's nobody here, but it was a very loud, it was like, imagine being stuck in that and trying to function through life. It's interesting. So what does trauma look like in children? I'm not going to read this out loud. I want you to read it yourself. But what else looks like this?
Autism.
Right. So it's interesting, the way that they diagnose autism, at least here in the United States, is a diagnostic tool called the ADOS. And so they look for certain things and their behaviors on the outside. However, if you have somebody who's been through a severe enough trauma, they look the same on the outside. That's why we don't treat labels, right? It's the same. It presents the same way. So this increase, I would argue, the increase in the autism diagnosis and the co-diagnosing with like CP or Down syndrome, or, you know, how many have been through a severe enough trauma situation that might present itself like autism. So I remember I was doing some consulting work for a clinic here in town, and they asked one day, they're like, our OT called out, do you mind doing an evaluation? I said, sure, no problem. And this young man comes in, he sits right down and is playing with his beaded toy, and foster mom, first red flag, goes, oh, he does, I went over to him. I got right down on his level and said, hi, my name is Miss Cheryl. We're going to play some games today. And when you're ready to go back, please stand up. And then I waited, and she's like, well, he doesn't talk. I was like, he's not deaf. And he whipped his head around and was like, let's go. Like, I like you. I'm good. And every time she said that he couldn't do something, it was like, okay, hold my cup of coffee. Like, and then we went and did it. And it was like, it's all on the approach. Don't assume he can't do something because he's got all of this going on. I would have argued that he probably didn't have an autism diagnosis. He just had a really, really not so good childhood. Maybe autism was in there too. I don't know. I don't know there's any way that teasing it out, but we can't ignore that some of these signs are trauma-based. So regardless of who we're working with. So it's not that you're going to treat the trauma. It's just more of, unless you're a psychologist or psychiatrist, or even myself, it's out of my scope of practice, but being aware that these things could be a sign of something else. So let's talk about that. Autism versus trauma. This is where I get really nerdy. So hang with me. Okay. So we have a healthy brain. And we're going to start with the slide to the left. Have to remember not just to point. Healthy brain. Everything's lighting up. Everything looks beautiful. We're getting input through the occipital lobe. It's going right back where it's supposed to. Right? It's going right back where you process all the information. Temporal lobe is lit up. And then we go over here. This individual was the brain of a Romanian orphan who was institutionalized after birth, so had very little stimulation. Temporal lobes are completely offline, and those are the areas of the brain that help with language processing and spatial recognition. And what I find interesting is that if we look here too, the vision processing is not quite the same. So this compensator fight or flight, we just don't get to this part of the brain. It stays down here, and it's this constant feedback loop. Like, I'm in fear, I'm in fear, I'm in fear, I'm in fear. Something bad's going to happen to me. To everything's all good. Now, if we hop over here, so healthy brain, it's the same thing. They just have it lit up different. Same thing. Autism, those centers can light up, and those centers are there and they have access to them, but there's more with the symptoms that they present is kind of where those nerve clusters are. So their brains are actually heavier and more dense according to the research. So if they've done autopsy research, and the brains are like physically heavier than the neurotypical population. Trauma never got that development. So the brain actually atrophies because those parts of the brain haven't been used. So these can still light up. The processing is a little bit different, whereas these never were developed and don't occur. And that's kind of why you see the same symptoms from the outside. But like I said, we're not going to treat the trauma. We're just going to be aware that it could be there, and that the way we still approach it the same way. Just being aware that maybe they're going to be a little bit more jumpy. Maybe they're not getting a full night's sleep because they're startling awake. Maybe, who knows, right? But just being aware that these things can happen right? All right. So this is an old slide, but the eye exercises that we do. So if I go, can I go back? The eye exercises. So think about this part of the brain, right? And how this isn't lighting up. So if we go ahead and do the eye exercises, it will stimulate the optic nerve. I will also argue that it will stimulate the ocular motor nerves. And so our fine motor muscles are our hands, our eyes, and our face. They're all teeny tiny little muscles. So I always argued with other therapists that if they have a fine motor issue, there's something way bigger going on. It's never just this. There's usually a speech delay, or there's something else going on, or there's a visual motor delay. They can't scan smoothly from left to right. But when we do these eye exercises, it improves the ability to control those movements. The reason they go ping-ponging all around is because they need to be hyper vigilant of the room around. They have to be hyper vigilant of their environment. But if they can gain control over that, it does calm down the nervous system. Imagine so for this, the drive in Florida in season, if we're heading toward Orlando, we all know that I-4 is just insane. And your eyes have to ping pong around for survival. Like you have to be able to see all these things coming at you. So we still need it. But when we're at rest, when there's no threat, they shouldn't still be ping-ponging all over the place, right? There was a study that they showed that improves letter recognition. So it goes back to what Hersha was talking about in the Denver model and using those eye exercises to help improve development. I didn't get to catch all of it. I had to step off, but we talked about this last time in the polyvagal lecture that, the breathing exercises calm the calms the nervous system. It's the only thing that doesn't require you don't need any equipment. So my argument with other therapists, and I know there's therapists on the call, is that we use things like weighted blankets or things that are external outside of our physical body. But why aren't we teaching something that's internal? Right? Great example, when I was traveling, a parent called me and she was all concerned that I was teaching breathing exercises and doing guided relaxation. And, I was in an outpatient clinic at a hospital. When an OT that she had met said he needed running and climbing and all this, I was like, it's Alaska, go climb a mountain. You don't need to come here for me to do that kind of thing that's not skilled, number one. And number two, if I taught him that the only way that he could calm his body down is climbing, do you want him climbing the church pews? Like, no, this is something that can be done quietly. Doesn't require any kind of equipment. We can do it in our car. We can do it in a classroom. I have a group of middle school students right now. They're all of them are reverse breathers. And so I was like, when you find your mind starting to wander in class, I want you to come back to this. And they're like, you don't want us to go back to paying attention? I was like, this will get you back there. And so I know we've talked about the increased use of electronics and the physical bodies that are like changing. And some of these kids, on top of trauma, on top of COVID, on top of everything else, and why not give them something that's actually going to calm their poor nervous systems down that they can take with them for the rest of their life, right? Dr. Sundar, I call him Dr. B. I can never pronounce his last name correctly, so I'm not going to butcher it. That's his website. It's pranascience.com. He's an integral yogi, and he does research on pranayama out of the University of South Carolina, Charleston. And he's discovered, and some of our friends with Scleroderma said this morning, that the breathing exercises increase saliva, which helps with GERD, which helps with our digestion. When you have a dried out mouth, your taste buds change too. So I have a theory, it's not proven, but that's okay. It will be someday, that it causes some of the picky eating. Like we see kids that are super selective and they only want carbs and they only want sugar. Well, what does that do? It increases the saliva in their mouth so they can break it down. Also, if they don't have a solid chew, because there's not enough saliva to break down the food, they're not going to want food that requires a lot of chewing. It needs to be able to be broken down and swallowed. It's the only things that are safe. So we did the demonstrations this morning with our crew, with Yoga for Scleroderma, and there's so many benefits. Like I could spend an hour on this. When it comes to trauma, it's the only thing that is going to get people out of that either fight, flight, freeze, shutdown. We know the benefits of the postures and getting things to move around, which I took a 10-hour trauma course, and what was interesting is they're calling it somatic therapy or movement. And I'm like, well, isn't this what we do here? So having, if somebody was frozen at the time of their trauma and being able to kind of get through some of these movements and how that can be beneficial in releasing it out of the physical body. Because sometimes we try, Renata hinted about this yesterday, where we lock traumas into our body physically. So a lot of times I'll see students that are like this, with all that list of things that I said earlier. For me, I tend to lock things in my hips. So yesterday, there's a physical therapist that teaches a group class in the evening. And he was like, I'm going to do all these hip openers. And I'm like, ooh, okay. We're going to see how this goes. And all I could hear was Renata's voice going, I'm here with you. Like, you have to, I had to talk to my body to get it to relax. And like, I don't do pigeon on a regular. I don't do the cow facing with the leg, like my hips do not open like that. And he was having us hold it for a really long time. So I had to talk myself out of a fight or flight. And it's the first time that I was like, nope, you're not going to pop out. We're just going. Usually I would just go, nope, I'm going to sit here in child's pose. I'll meet you when you're done. But you just have to talk to it. And so the reason I bring that up is just remember that with the kids, that sometimes we all hide traumas and tensions and things in different places. So when you go to release it, you might see a Chiva Kami did something the other morning in one of our classes, and it was this, she had a squat, hinge from the hips, and go all the way down. And I let out, this must have been a god-awful sound, because my husband was like, are you okay? I was like, nope, I'm good. Actually, I'm good. I'm good. Huh, who knew? Right? So being prepared for those kind of reactions happen as well. And it's not teaching them that it's not good or bad. It's just being okay with that sensation, like in that quote I read in the beginning. Being okay with those inner sensations, it's okay. And sometimes it's really hard to do. It's easier to say this. I'm going on 12 years and I'm just figuring this stuff out. So guided relaxation, we know. What I will say with trauma, though, sometimes our friends, it's a very vulnerable position to be laying on your back, legs apart, palms up. Especially those who've had any kind of physical or sexual abuse. It's not a place of comfort. Sometimes a blanket will help because then they're covered and it feels safer. I will say that I don't use weighted blankets, but just a blanket. The other thing is letting them know it's okay to leave their eyes open until they're ready to close them. And being careful of which ones you're using, because a lot of times the ones where we bring awareness to certain parts of the body will send off that fight or flight response, depending on where they're storing their traumas or depending on what happened. I don't ask unless they want to disclose, but I usually don't know. But over time, little by little, and patience key, getting that to calm itself down. because it's hard. And it's funny. I always joke. I always say, we're going to do the hardest pose of the day. And they're like, oh, you have our attention. And then I lay down. They're like, that's not hard. And I was like, you hold it. Let's see what happens as I guide you through. And then they realize, oh, maybe this is a little difficult. This is harder than a headstand. I'm like, Watch your students. Be very aware of these little things that could happen that could cue you in, and then maybe we can guide them through to a safe space. Like I said, we're not treating the trauma. So I have the rest of the time for questions and answers. We did do this as a CPD. I would like to even just do trauma on its own because there's just so much to talk about. There's just so much. So I want to take the time to go back to that first slide and maybe problem solve through a diagnosis. So I'm going to go all the way back. It's going to flash, so just hang on. It was 18 hours of content to make down into one. Okay. So somebody throw out a label. You can put it in the chat. We're going to interact. Of course, can I see it? There we go. Yeah, yeah, I know. I'm trying to just use first guided. And what are they called? Vision therapists, developmental obstetricians. Yes. All right. Somebody give me a diagnosis. This is where you get to talk to me. Bueller. Anyone? Hyperactive. Okay, so that is more of a symptom, but let's break that down. Steve wrote hyperactive. Whoop, nope. Go back. We can use this pyramid too. Okay. So hyperactive is a symptom, could be a symptom of many things. Trauma, ADHD, autism, dementia can even be thrown in there. So something's going on here. We have got to get this guy in check in order to go back up the pyramid. What I would ask though with the hyperactive scenario is what other things are going on. ADHD can be a symptom, not just a diagnosis. It could be a symptom of trauma. It could be a symptom of Down syndrome. It could be a symptom of autism. It can stand on its own, but it can also be a symptom of something bigger that's going on. And usually when I think hyperactive, what I think is fear response. We have to go. We want to leave the present moment because it's not safe. For whatever reason. It could be not able to be still and running away. They want to escape the present moment. I forget where I learned, somebody had said that. I think it was a documentary on Netflix, and it was just kind of like, this present moment's not safe. So if we get somewhere in the future, that maybe it's going to be okay. But that's running. That's even mentally running, right? Constantly go, because it's not safe. You're living in more fear than hope. So when we're in that kind of, sometimes I can get in that state of being like hyper focused, and that's not also good either, because then you start to tune out everything else. You do need fight or flight to survive. We need some of it. We're not monks in a temple meditating all day, right? We have things we have to do. We're moving about our community. We have jobs. We have to, we have roles where some people are mothers and fathers. You have to have some level of fight or flight freeze to survive. those guys that live in the monastery where there's nothing to worry about, or in an ashram, they don't need it. And funny enough, they did MRIs of monks in the Himalayas, and they actually have very little amygdalas. If they don't, even if some of them completely didn't have it at all, they don't use it. They don't use their limbic system, so it just completely went whoop. So what is, but we can't, we have to be able to, like, I need to be aware if somebody's going to come flying in my office, or I need to be somewhat in some kind of level, not a heightened level of arousal, but we need to have some arousal. Those guys get to sit and meditate all day. They've renounced all their possessions. They don't have to worry about anything, right? So they don't use it. You don't use it, you lose it. So, well, that's Steve wrote in the chat, but when he's waiting to have lunch, he is still. So he doesn't want to escape from food. No, it's a basic survival. We need fuel. We need food. What I will say is watch how quickly they're eating. Like when my brother is really upset, he will shovel things in and try to go. He wants the food. He wants to sit. He wants to eat. But I'd be curious to know if there's actually like a quality of chew, or if we're just like shoveling the things in, because we lose awareness to those fine motor muscles when we go into fight or flight. We don't need them. We need the blood in the large muscle groups so we can go, or freeze if we go into shutdown. There was another one, Down syndrome and nonverbal. So sometimes they present a little bit differently, but everything I just said is the same. They tend to, because of the lower than average muscle tone, and depending on the individual, they might flop a little bit more. So it's more like, instead of run, because they don't have that kind of coordination, they will just flop. And then it's the same. It's just presented. It's something that's presented a little bit differently. That's all. I have students, I'm like, I flop, you flop. You just let me know when we're ready. That was too much. Okay. We'll try again. Comment, I see kids with ADHD and learning disabilities that lack self-confidence as well. So this is why I like the end of the YSC method, because we always say something positive about ourselves. That might be the only thing positive they hear all day, because they have an IEP, or they're told they have special reading teachers, and they know that they're different, and they have to be pulled out for therapy and extra reading instruction and this and this. The list goes on. So yeah, they're told what they can't do all day long. All day. And you come in and you say, I am, sometimes they're not even ready to receive that message. But if we say, I am peace, I am joy, I am love, if we repeat this over and over again, the hope is that they actually believe it. So in schools, I'm going to say, we're going to say something positive about ourselves before we go. I've never had any box about spirituality, because they need to hear that they are those things. Even the kids that I had in New York, I was in a school that was all children with disabilities, and I had this one group of all boys on the autism spectrum of some sort or another, and behavior wise, it was the 30 minutes once a week. They weren't in timeout. And the behavior therapists are like, what are you doing? Come, you do the class too. Come on, let's go. And they were like, they're attending. Like, no kidding. They didn't have to worry about their behaviors or escaping from the present moment or having to go anywhere or having to do, like, the staff knew just to model what I was doing, I was like, do not give extra cues. It's too confusing. Just do the class off to the side. And then my supervisor shows up and was like, what are you doing? And I was like, you come too. She was crying by the end. It was just like, I had no idea they were doing so well. And I was like, I tried to tell you. Kirsha said, even saying that you're such a good boy and I'm happy to share this time with you. Yeah. Even if they can't repeat after you, you still say the final message just so they know that they, there's something positive. And there's something to be said by that. So opening up for questions. I'm going to stop my screen. If I can figure it out. All my buttons moved. Stop. Okay, now I can see everybody. Oh. Hello, everyone. I hate talking with PowerPoints because then I can't see everybody.
I know, it's very frustrating. So if anyone has any questions, just let us know and we will open your microphone.
A lot of content broken down into a very short period of time. It's hard to
Cheryl, that was magnificent.
Oh,
Thank you very, very much for listening to my advice once that you have a talk. Do not put the science on. Do not lose the spiritual aspects of teachings. And you are doing it. You are making this combination in between the both of them without losing the spiritual aspects. I appreciate that. That is pretty good.
I need Sri Devi's slide on what Sanskrit does to the brain. I need to add that to my mantra section of my presentations. Like I need, like that was like, oh my God, that's brilliant.
Yeah, but I thought that was fascinating. One of the first graphics that you showed there, showing the relationship in between so many spiritual aspects of the body. Like Sri Devi was showing how Sanskrit work several areas of the body. Even when you are talking, you are stimulating vital organs in your tongue. So this is the way that our ancestors used to, see life. And nowadays, people are getting further and further away of these aspects, spiritual aspects. And the science could be even more developed if that spiritual aspects didn't have been lost. If it have been lost, it could be even more advanced. Science could be more advanced.
I think that quote that I opened up with Vander Kolk, the author of The Body Keeps the Score, they're coming back to that, right? It says, you have to be aware of that inner experience and learn what's going on. Well, how are you going to get there?
Yes.
Like, so I thought that was interesting. And I found it last night.
But it was very, very beautiful. I just put a comment there when you said that this is not, it hasn't been researched yet about the optic nerve, about vision. Thank you so much. It was amazing. Amazing job. Keep on working. Keep on doing this beautiful job, Cheryl.
Will do.
Cheryl, I was looking at exactly what you're saying about the child that is looking all over the place. And I was taking this workshop with Tom Meyers, who is, for me, amazing. And he was saying that the peripheral vision is the one that actually detects the movement. So, of course, if you are in a trauma or something, that is much more like enhanced to fear, I believe. So agitation, the ADHD makes total sense that that's what they're doing. And if thinking about that and thinking about the eye exercises and that we're bringing the focus in, is helping the child to actually look in the center and stop and trying to detect every single movement that is going around them. So it's just an observation that lighted up in my brain when I was hearing you. It was very interesting.
And remember, as Roshini was saying this morning, it always go back to the keys. It all go back to the keys. So the keys are the spiritual aspects of this method. But not for you to teach, but for you to become. Because I don't care, I don't think it is important to be teaching it just for, people think that you are phenomenal. I think that the best way to teach it is to become them, and because it's all energy that you create. And so when you approach people notice something in your energy that they don't know what is. And then they become curious and want to learn. I want to be like this person. What is this person doing? That even work with this difficult child with so many traumas, with her or him, the child reacts differently. Many physical therapists have told me this in classes, during classes. Oh my God, I work with this child for 10 years. And the child is so agitated. Now the child comes here and do everything there in front of my eyes. And the child has never seen you before. And I have seen it with lots of our teachers. It's not just with me. And I totally believe that all this science, even with all this knowledge, we cannot forget the keys.
For sure.
Thank you, Cheryl. Wonderful talk. Thank you.
Any questions, guys?
Well, then you're just gonna have to come to my training for the rest of it.
Okay, if you don't have any questions, then what we are going to do is that I will